I've always enjoyed chess. In fact, I was in the chess club in high school, so it's time to make a chessboard. I'm going to be making this out of black walnut because that's what happens to be at the top of my wood pile. Since it is going to be all black walnut, I make sure I pick pieces that have a lot of heartwood and also ones that have a lot of sapwood. I mark them off to be a bit longer than what I need, and then I just rough cut them with a circular saw. This also makes them much easier to handle, especially at the next step, which will be running them through the thickness planer. I happen to have the Wen 13-inch benchtop planer, which means I don't understand why people buy more expensive planers and then spend more money to put the spiral blades in it, when the Wen planer already comes with spiral blades in it. As with rough cutting the length, here again I'm bringing it down to a bit thicker than what I want. I turn around to my table saw to square up the slabs by first trimming off the natural edges. To help with this process, I extend the table saw's fence by clamping a 4-foot level to it. Now we can cut them into individual pieces, but here again, making them a bit larger than the final dimension that I'm after. At this point, we can separate the heartwood from the sapwood, giving us our black and white squares. Once again, I just turn around to my thickness planer and run all the pieces through. Now finally bringing them down to the precise dimensions that I'm after. Time to start gluing this together, making sure you alternate colors and that you have 8 pieces. Just needing a bit of glue and some clamps for this part. You may notice that the outside pieces are a bit wider than the others. Reason for this will become apparent later on. Next day, I'll take them out of the clamps and see how they look. It's interesting how on the underside you can't notice much, but when you flip them over, the color distinction between the heartwood and sapwood becomes very apparent. Now that we have the pieces all glued together, it's time to cut them apart again. But we cut them perpendicular from the way we glued them. Using a stop block made from a scrap piece of wood held on by a C-clamp makes this both time and money efficient. Just to review what we've done so far, we took a solid piece of wood, cut it into thin strips, glued those thin strips together, cut them apart into different thin strips, and now we glue those back together. Here again you may notice that the squares on the sides, tops and bottom are a bit larger than those in the center. Taking a palm router, I put in a small groove in between all the squares, and this is why I was leaving the end squares a bit bigger, is because of the routing will cause some tear out. All 4 sides will get a quick trim on the table saw to remove that, and then a rough sanding at this point to get all the little fuzzies and whatnot. The chessboard is more or less done at this point, but we want to make a little frame around it to make it look a little nicer. So back to the table saw to make a custom snug fit, again also out of black walnut. You can really see now the contrast between the heartwood and the sapwood to make the chessboard. Again, this is all black walnut, just using different parts of the tree. Obviously, we need to then glue the frame onto the sides of the chessboard. I'm doing this with the underside facing up so that it'll be flush on the top. Here again, it's interesting to see how on this side it really doesn't look like much. One final pass with the trim router to go around the perimeter, And yes, I am eyeballing it up for where I start, stop, and with the initial plunge. Of course, everything gets one final sanding, and if I fill in the grooves, I might pick a different color depending on how I feel at the time. This and other items are for sale at my Etsy store, Old Zines Woods. It'd also be great if you could subscribe to my YouTube channel, click that like button, and leave a message. I'd greatly appreciate it. Come check us out on Etsy, Facebook, and YouTube.